5, 4, 3, 2.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for joining us in this weekly media briefing and public health update with Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgilia, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and joining us today is Dr. James Bridgers, who is the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services. Also from HHS is Mr. Sean O'Donnell, Assistant Chief of Public Health Services, Dr. Earl Stoddard, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer for the county, and our guest today is Sarah Kogel-Smucker, who is the county's Climate Change Officer. Here to answer some questions as well this morning, it's Mr. Matt Misorko, who is Emergency Management Specialist from the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. Thank you to everybody for joining us. Mr. County Executive, good morning.
Good morning. And God, it's usually not morning when we start this. So thank you everybody for joining us a little bit earlier than usual this week. I think most people saw the video from Saturday's flash floods. In Silver Spring, it showed people walking through deep water and people driving through deep water. Calls for help went out dozens of times in just a few hours because of the heavy rain and flash flooding that impacted the county and elsewhere. Well, this is not the norm. It's certainly not an anomaly. And I can testify to that because I live on Sligo Creek. I'm fortunate because I'm 64 feet above the creek. I've seen the creek go out of its beds and, cover the Sligo Creek Parkway with a few inches of rain before. I watched a guy walking down the street during this storm where the water was almost up to his knees. That's a level of water I have not seen before, and it's indicative of, the severity of the storms we had. In the last 60 days, we've seen the most flood watches issued over a 2-month span in the program's history. These records go back nearly 20 years. Over that same span, we received up to 15 inches of rain, which is 5 to 7 inches above normal. There's a direct correlation between our impact on this planet and the overall increase in extreme weather we've seen here locally and around the world. We've seen it with more intense rainstorms leading to the increased risk of flooding. And part of the county's climate action plan calls for climate adaptation actions, many of which were already put in motion. One of the first actions we took was evaluating our water infrastructure's resilience. That helps us determine which repairs and enhancement needs to be addressed immediately to help us grow without outgrowing our stormwater systems. And I have to say that we have a history of waiving the volume of water that comes off of development because developers keep saying it's too hard, it's too expensive to deal with. Well, we've got massive shopping centers that were built without adequate stormwater controls. And those inadequate stormwater controls collectively have added to far more water going into our streams than our streams are able to handle. We've limited our protections to quality protections, which is a nice thing, but not dealing with water quantity is going to come back to haunt us. And we're going to try again to put some teeth into this so we can actually address quantity requirements as well as quality requirements. As I mentioned a few weeks ago, we are thankful to have flood sensors in key places throughout the county to help us gauge water levels. We'll be adding 5 new sensors throughout the Up County by the end of the month, all of them in high-risk locations with a history of flooding. It's important to monitor the soil moisture and ambient humidity through the new Mesonet system so we understand when we have conditions that can make us more vulnerable to flash flooding. Obviously, if the ground is soaked, it's not a very absorbent material for heavy rainfall. And if the rainfall can't go into the soil, then the rainfall winds up running off of it and then into the streets. So there is a connection between moisture in the soil and what happens during a severe rainstorm. And we're also working on some other work. We're looking for ways to reuse water on site, limiting runoff and expanding community gardens to make better use of our open spaces, and in some cases, give our runoff somewhere productive to go. We're planting over 18,000 shade trees to help reduce stormwater runoff. We're also paying attention to our changing climate and adapting development standards in consideration of climate change. I want to invite the county's climate change officer, Sarah Kogel-Smucker, to this briefing now to talk more about our climate action plan and the sustainability work that we're doing as a county. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, County Executive. As said, I'm Sarah Kogel-Smucker, the Climate Change Officer, and I'm glad to be here to talk about the important link between climate change and flooding, what the county is doing, and what you can do. So to expand on what the County Executive said, um, climate change has a direct link to increased flooding. And how that happens is as there's more greenhouse gas emissions, climate change pollution, trapping heat in the atmosphere, the planet is warming. And that warming causes evaporation of water. And that means there's more moisture in the air. So for every 1 degree Fahrenheit of warming, and we're already, as a planet, experiencing approximately that. There's an estimated 4% more water vapor in the air. And that means that when there's a storm event, there's more water to be swept up. And so we see more frequent flooding and more extreme flooding, especially that really intense precipitation that we saw on Saturday. And then, as the county executive mentioned, soil conditions affect it. So, in addition to if you've just had rain and the soil's really wet, if you have a drought and we're having more frequent droughts due to climate change and the soil's really dry, it can't absorb water easily, especially very quickly before it has a chance to get wet during those extreme rain bursts. And that can lead to increased flooding and increased flood risk. So the organization Climate Central estimates a 38% increase in flood damage costs in Maryland by 2050. But we have a plan. And our plan isn't just as we're seeing these events this summer. We have a comprehensive climate action plan that, under the county executive's leadership, we developed in 2021. And that plan addresses both climate mitigation and climate resilience. So there's 86 actions in the plan, and many of them are about how we can stop our climate change pollution and do our part and be a local leader to stop contributing to the pollution that's causing climate change. But 20 of the actions, as the county executive mentioned, are about climate adaptation, the acknowledgement that the climate is changing, that it is going to continue to change, and that we need to adapt our infrastructure, our systems, and our own thinking and actions so that we are better prepared for flooding and other extreme weather events, and that we can withstand them better. So the county executive listed many of the actions that is in the climate action plan related to flooding, like the expanding green infrastructure and the looking at stormwater infrastructure, the greening of public spaces, the planting of trees. So of the 20 adaptation actions, as of fiscal year 24, we have started 17 of those actions and made significant progress on 11 of the 20. So from the 2021 plan to here in 2025, we're really working as fast as we can to put these adaptation measures in place. And the plan acknowledges that we don't all face equal risk. So, flooding is terrible in your home, no matter where you live. It's a really unfortunate occurrence and something that we all need to take seriously. But if you live in a basement apartment and your entire family's there and all of your belongings there, and the basement apartment floods, that is a different kind of risk and danger than if you live in an entire house and your basement floods. And so our climate adaptation actions address the inequities that exist and make sure that as we are doing these adaptations, we're thinking about addressing these inequities so that everyone in our community can become safer and be more resilient to a changing climate and the more extreme weather that we're seeing. So what can you do? As the county executive mentions, the county is doing a lot. But the climate action plan is not just a county plan, it's a community-wide plan. And becoming climate resilient requires community-wide action. So there are some key measures I want to emphasize here. You've heard them before, you'll hear them again because this is the message that we want to get out to the public, is take some action to address your risk from the more frequent and more extreme flooding from climate change. Number one, sign up for Alert Montgomery. That is the county's alert system. It gives you information you need. But just as important, heed warnings when you receive them. And this really takes a mental shift. If you have lived in the same house or apartment for a long time, maybe you grew up in the county, you basically feel like you understand the parameter of risk, you understand when you need to take action. But this mental shift with climate change is conditions are different than they were in the past, and they're going to continue to change. And that means instead of sort of just getting a warning and going about your business, the best thing you can do is heed that warning. So when you get a flood watch, that means conditions are present for potential flooding. So stay alert for changing weather conditions and be ready to change plans as needed. If you own a home, that's the moment to check around your home and be sure gutters and downspouts are clear of debris. If you're not at home at the time and someone else is, mention to them, can you just take a quick walk around and make sure the downspouts and gutters are clear? You can check the storm drains right near your home and, if you're able, clear them of debris so that that water won't pool and flood as easily. If you receive a flood warning, that means flooding is occurring in your area. The major thing to do is stay off the roads if at all possible. We're emphasizing the phrase turn around, don't drown. So if you're driving, never ever cross a flooded roadway. Only 6 inches of water can knock you off your feet, and 12 inches can wash your car away. It's never worth the risk. Make an emergency plan with your family and practice. What will you do in case your house floods? How will you get out? Where will you meet? And then look into flood damage prevention strategies for your home. The county's website has really great resources about tree planting, rain barrels, French drains, rain gardens, flood-aware landscaping. And there's even some rebates for rain barrels. You can explore the National Flood Insurance Program. And the best way to get information about this is to go to montgomerycountymd.gov/flood. And that will connect you to everything from resources on DEP's website to information about the National Flood Insurance Program. But circling back to climate change, we need to do both mitigation and resilience. And the county has listed 15 easy everyday actions you can take in both of those areas. And the best way to find information about it is montgomerycountymd.gov/climate smart. And that way you can take the pledge to be climate smart and get connected to county resources so you can do your part both to mitigate climate change and become resilient to it. And I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Stoddard to discuss a little bit more about how our flood monitoring performed during Saturday's flooding, because that's one of our key flood actions to make us more resilient.
Thank you, Sarah, and I'll be very brief. So obviously the heavy rainfall that we saw on Saturday largely impacted the south and southwest portions of the county, particularly the Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, Wheaton, Bethesda, and Potomac areas. We had about 20 rain gauges that we got measurements from in those areas, and they tended to all show greater than 1 inch per hour rainfall, with some hitting as high as 2 inches per hour. And in the Sligo Creek watershed, we saw periods, not full hours, but a period where it came out to about 3.68 inches per hour in that watershed. And that was the most heavily hit watershed, and that obviously where we saw the most number of vehicles stuck in floodwaters as well. The Sligo Creek and New Hampshire Avenue flood sensor that we had spiked 100 inches of increased depth in about 30 minutes, and then crested at about nearly 145 inches about 20 minutes after that, as the upstream water came down and commingled with the water that was coming from the rainfall directly. We had a number of water rescues, but fortunately, because of our flood monitoring system, none of those rescues ended up being incredibly serious, and we had no reported injuries or, fortunately, for fatalities either, due in large part to the fact that we had early warning and we had real-time information that we didn't have in previous events of this nature. And obviously our fire rescue providers did exactly what we trained and prepared them to do, and they did so exceptionally. And so, all things considered, given that this was we estimate somewhere between a 5 and 16 year event in the Sligo Creek watershed. Obviously that it's probably closer to likely to become closer to a 5-year event as we move forward, but that gives you some sense of the sort of historical context that we can put this rainfall into. And so, I just I want to give credit to people like Matt Miziarko and our Office of Emergency Management, Homeland Security for really leaning forward on some of the recommendations that appear in the climate action plan and getting us to this point where we have this increased technology that gives us better information that allows us to keep our residents safer. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Stoddard.
you.
Members of the
I just-
media.
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to add to that with just one thing, just to put his 145 inches in context. Imagine you're standing in your house and you look at one of the walls of your house, and that wall's 8 feet high. So look at that wall, 8 feet high, and then imagine another 4 feet on top of it. That's your 12 feet, which is 144 inches. Just to get a perspective on how much the water was over the normal level. That's not insignificant.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. Members of the media, any questions right now regarding this topic, flood and climate change for county officials this afternoon? Please raise your hands. Mike Jackitis, WTOP. Good afternoon, Mike. Go ahead. Good morning still. Mike, you need to unmute.
Lorna, that's
There we
Kate
go.
Ryan.
Sorry. There
Yeah.
we go. Yeah. I had to take over a computer here because mine was acting up. It's Kate Ryan.
Hi, Kate.
Hey, now we hear about the turnaround, don't drown. We all saw, however, the fire truck go into the water. Obviously, they were responding to water rescues. I have a couple of questions. Do we know how many water rescues they did that day? What is the instruction to them on how deep they can go before a truck might get into trouble? And is the estimate of a $500,000 replacement cost there accurate?
I'll take that one. So, how many rescues that particular engine did, or are you talking about generally from fire rescue broadly?
How many fire water rescues did the county have to do? But again, that truck in particular, is that a $500,000 bill that we're going to be looking at as a result?
Yeah.
And was that in county protocol of like, guys, you're responding, here's what you do, here's when you have to back off or stop?
So I'll take those in order as you asked them, I think, which is I think that there were approximately 15 water rescues dispatched, but I think it's important to understand that we didn't do 15 rescues, meaning by the time they got there, they may have self extricated or had members of the public, help them get out of their vehicles in those cases. So it was probably some number between 0 and 10. I don't know that I have the exact number in front of me for how many rescues we did, but we dispatched about 15. As to your other question, the answer to that is no, it is not in fire rescue protocol to drive through flooded waters. We train people to follow the direction as we provide it to our residents and not drive through floodwaters. And so that situation is definitely under investigation, and obviously we'll follow the standard investigation and personnel process that we follow with regard to what we expect people to do and how we train them, and what happens when they don't follow the standard operating procedures set forward for their and our, their safety and the safety of the apparatus that they're operating. Now, as to the damage, I know we are expecting to get a preliminary estimate on that. The apparatus itself is certainly a $500,000 apparatus. I don't know that it was irreparably damaged where we would need to replace it, though. I get that impression certainly from the initial feedback that we got, but it will be some number of thousands of dollars of damage likely that we will have to repair to further answer your question. But I did not get the impression that the vehicle was a total loss from the initial conversation I had with the fire chief. But again, we are still waiting on a preliminary estimate for repairs.
Okay, thank you so much. To the county executive, is there a problem with the fire department? And I'm asking because we're understanding that incident is under investigation. There was also the incident of water being, released from a hose in Silver Spring onto a playing field. And I see on the MFRS Twitter or X feed an apology from the chief on a comment made by an MFRS, Montgomery County Fire Service employee on the police social media account. I do not know what that was. They are not saying anything further, but are there issues within the fire department with violations of protocols or behaviors?
I think these are possibly different things. I mean, the issue with the fire truck could be as simple as just not the driver not being adequately trained or adequately assessing the situation. It's not the first time, that fire trucks have had accidents. So this kind of stands out because they drove into the water, but it's quite possible that he didn't understand either how deep it was or the limitations of the truck. As for the other things, these aren't the only times we've had personnel issues inside the fire department and or any departments, to be blunt. Um, as Chief Manger used to say, if you remember Chief from back when he was our police chief here, he'd say my department's made up of human beings, and among those human beings, sometimes are people who don't always do the right thing. And that's just the nature. It's the nature of every workplace in this country, probably, that not everybody does everything exactly the way they should. We were very concerned about both incidents. I know what the language was, and it was absolutely inappropriate on that posting. And they'll be handled through the process that we have here. They're not being ignored. And I can guarantee you that Chief Smedley takes this stuff very seriously. And there will be consequences.
Thank you very much.
Can I just add, by and large, our firefighters, both career and volunteer, do an exceptional job in Montgomery County. And so it really stands out when these kinds of incidents do occur. And I will tell you, with some of the situations, there's as much frustration with some of the other members of the department, the career staff, that some of these things reflect on them. And so there is definitely a frustration that is expressed. And obviously this is why we have an investigative process and why we have disciplinary processes and why we have training or remedial training where appropriate. But I think it is important to recognize that we do take these situations very seriously,
Yep.
but we also recognize that the vast majority, the vast majority of time, our first responders are doing exactly what we train them to do, and they're doing it exceptionally well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Kate. Brad Bell, ABC 7. Good morning still, Brad.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks, everyone. So, hey, back to floods. Mr. County Executive, you've seen a lot of floods over the years. There's a memorial plaque down there along Sligo Creek from a 1963 flood where a couple firefighters lost their lives trying to save people. It's not new, but how concerned are you about how much worse it's getting?
I'm concerned. I mean, I've been pushing to try to change the way we approach land use and our controls over development because the county historically just grants waiver after waiver for quantity. And this is the result of granting waiver after waiver for quantity. I mean, this water, if you think about it logically, 3 inches of water falling into the creek shouldn't have resulted in feet of gain in height, but it's all the water that runs off from the streets that are basically fed either by residential neighborhoods or by particularly areas of commercial construction that are totally impervious. Entire parking lots, the entire surface is just concrete, and there's no place for that water to go. And we've never required people to adequately store it on site. We're going to have to start thinking about that. I think, and Earl or Sarah can correct me, always forget whether it's Arlington or Alexandria that actually has the equivalent, I think, of a football field that was excavated underneath the football field and is filled with water to divert it until it can be released more slowly in order to help prevent flooding. Those are the kind of things that we're likely to have to start looking at in places of the county where the amount of flow heading towards streams that's going to lead to flooding or heading towards streets that'll lead to flooding, even if there aren't streams there. Those are probably things we're going to have to start thinking about if we're going to get a handle on this. And this is only going to get worse. I mean, Earl was, I think, being optimistic when he said he thought these might be 5-year storms. I'm thinking these might be more like annual events around here. we've the weather patterns have significantly changed. And if, I was paying attention when they were talking about some of the heavy storms that had moved out of the Midwest and not the hurricane, the tornadoes and the heavy rains shifting more toward the eastern part of the country. I would be surprised if this simply goes back to normal. I think it's most likely going to be we're seeing a new normal, and the new normal is not going to be good, and we're going to have to respond to it in a meaningful way.
Thank you.
I would also,
Very assessment.
I-
Yeah.
we'll be talking about this more coming forward here, and I think that our Department of Environmental Protection is actually engaged in some really significant hydrologic analysis work that we think
Yep.
will also be important in understanding the risk moving forward for Montgomery County and doing an analysis watershed by watershed for I think our top 11 watersheds moving over the next couple of years, and we'll be rolling out I think the first of those conversations later this summer/fall.
I think Sligo is first, as a matter of
It
fact.
is correct. That is correct.
And just to add, to underscore the county executive's concern, where we can feel at least some comfort in our jurisdiction is, we are concerned because we're looking at the science and the facts and the data and the changes that we are experiencing and we are likely to experience, but we're also taking action. And I think the flood monitoring that Dr. Stoddard talked about, and then the comprehensive flood management plan that Dr. Stoddard mentioned is underway, is just some examples of the actions. So, the climate change is going to affect communities, whether they're concerned, whether they take action. And what we can do is take it seriously. And there is some degree of comfort, I think, in being in a community that is taking it so seriously and is taking action. And as the county executive said, some of those actions are going to be significant capital investments. And hopefully, as a community, we can support those investments and do what we need to do to reduce risk overall.
Thank you, Brad. Marianne Chassat, Montgomery Community Media.
Thank you.
morning.
Good morning.
Mhm.
County Executive, you mentioned the new flood sensors coming soon. Do we know the exact locations?
I just knew the 5 were in the Up County. I don't know the exact locations off the top of my head. I don't know if Earl knows them, but I can't tell you exactly. Maybe Sarah could.
Matt may be able to is probably the best person to describe where we're looking next.
Good morning. I can tell you as I pull them up, it's going to be, do you want the specific addresses or do you want just the streets?
Intersections, streets.
Streets?
Yeah.
I can give you the 2200 block of Brighton Dam Road, the 5400 block of Griffith Road, Griffith Road, the 26,000 block of Long Corner Road, and the 23,900 block of Log House Road. The fifth one is near the intersection of West Old Baltimore Road and Old Baltimore Road up in Clarksville, but it's such a rural area of the county, it doesn't really have an address. So it's a latitude and longitude right there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you, Marianne. Members of the media, any more questions regarding flooding and or climate change? Oh, there's Kate Ryan again. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Matt, when you just mentioned those 5 new spots, those are these the road sensors? Are they the gauges? I want to make sure I've got that right. And are those areas, Clarksburg, for example, has had a lot of development in recent years. Are those areas impacted by a combination of weather and recent development? Can we say why those areas were selected?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So those 5 up county locations, we looked at the history of water rescue calls and the 911 computer-aided dispatch system, as well as some geographic information system mapping, and those were flagged as locations that do get, they're low water crossings or they're very near a low water crossing in a rural area, and that's why they were flagged for putting flood sensors. Those are actually for monitoring water levels on waterways. It's not looking at, how much water is going across a road from maybe water sheening off of a road or a storm drain. It's just an expansion of the existing program. As far as the Clarksburg, the decision to expand up to these locations was made independent of development in Clarksburg. There's a history going back even before the time that I started working for the county. I've been with the county since 2013, and we have some water rescue calls going as far back as 2006 in these locations. So we're closing a gap that's been here for a while.
It's super helpful. And again, so I'm not confusing or conflating sensors versus the gauges. How
These
many
are-
of you do we have in the county?
Sensors, gauges, they're both synonyms. They are, when these are put in, we will have 40 in the county.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kate. Members of the media, any more questions regarding this topic? No more questions? Well, do remember that you can always reach out to Scott Peterson in regards to any questions regarding emergency management or flood sensors and mitigation. Thank you, Sarah and Matt, for joining us this morning. We know you need to depart, Matt. Sarah, if you'd like to stay in the media briefing till the end, you can remain here. If not, you're free to depart. Thank you for joining us, Mr. County Executive.
Yeah, thank you all for helping out this morning. I appreciate it. So other things to talk about. I want to talk about ZTA 2502, which the council passed yesterday. I want to echo the frustration and disappointment of many residents around the county, and I appreciate that 3 council members voted against the ZTA. And I agree with the assessment voiced by Councilmember Katz that this will not increase affordable housing. It absolutely will not increase affordable housing unless you radically change the definition of affordable housing. What it will do is impact communities and displace residents currently living in affordable houses if those residents are renters, which many of them are, as well as being minorities. And if the property owners decide to rebuild their properties to add additional units, it provides an incentive to redevelop naturally occurring affordable homes into more expensive homes. And Park and Planning did an earlier study when they looked at what happens in a neighborhood if they were to replace single-family homes with duplexes or triplexes, and the study said that the new homes would be as expensive or more expensive than the houses that already exist. So if you're taking some of these more affordable homes that people are renting along Georgia Avenue and University Boulevard and a number of other roads that are targeted here, and you look at the rental levels, which approach 50%, and you look at who actually lives there, which isn't rocket science, you can figure out who's going to get moved out. And when the landlords decide they can make more money by building a duplex or a triplex, those folks aren't going to be there, and the new housing is not likely to be cheaper than what's there today. So this is a problem. An earlier study, like I said, that Park and Planning actually did showed that this is not an effective strategy. In fact, back when they did that study, they were trying to package their housing program as affordable housing, and they had to change it to attainable housing, which is perhaps the most meaningless phrase in that you could possibly use. All housing is attainable. It all depends how much money you make. And that ignores the question of about how much money people make and what can they afford. So the assertion this is about affordable housing requires a really large stretch of the imagination. And since the authors of the bill and the council majority know the same demographic data that I know, that means that they know full well that Black and brown families are going to be excluded from ownership because their incomes are significantly lower than their white and Asian counterparts. So much for racial equity. Final plans that reflect no input from the community. This plan never engaged the community. People are told what the planning board is going to do and what the council is going to do. And the amount of civic engagement is appallingly low, particularly since you're talking about people's houses and the places they chose to live. Planning used to be a public process with citizen committees that included businesses, developers, and staff. And staff from Park and Planning was support, not dictating what the plans were going to be. And those reports are actually voted on by committees and move forward. And I know this because I served on these committees. I was part of these committees. I knew other people were part of these committees. When I was on the council and we were doing master plans, there were real committees that issued reports. All of this has been eliminated. It started under Casey Anderson and it's gone on steroids now, where both the council and the planning board no longer conduct true public hearings. There were no meetings in the neighborhood. You're talking about a plan that affects wide swaths of the county, yet the council had no meetings in neighborhoods to talk about this, to give them a chance. And nor did the planning board involve neighborhood meetings and create committees made out of neighborhoods and businesses in order to talk about what people really wanted. You just cannot assess what people want in a 2-hour meeting where people get to put post-it notes on a board and staff collects the notes. It is such an abomination of the public process that I'm just shocked that people are going along with changing planning in this way. All it does is turn the planners into the decision makers and cut the public out of the process. And I think the public is beginning to figure out that what they say and what they think matters very little to the planning board and apparently not too much to the council. I want to read some of the content of the emails that have been sent to me. And this came from a group, well, they'll tell you who they are. So, and I'm quoting here. We are the backbone of Montgomery County, the workers, caretakers, and community builders that have made these neighborhoods our home. But ZTA 2502, Thrive 2050, and other fast-track policies threaten our families, our homes, and our future. Many of us are immigrants who fought hard to build a life here, often purchasing homes after years of saving and sacrifice. Now those very homes are being labeled teardowns or development opportunities. We were not involved in the planning process, yet the consequences fall hardest on us. These plans are moving forward without respecting the communities they would displace, and that must stop. The majority of those who live along these corridors are immigrant, Hispanic, Latino, Black, and senior populations. Let us be clear, this is not housing justice. This is discrimination and gentrification backed by systemic erasure. That's not from me, folks. That's from folks who are being affected by this. And when they talk about what's coming, they mention Thrive. What's coming next and what the council, again, refuses to talk about and tell people what they're doing, they are already having sent over to them the first corridor plan. So this plan takes the corridors, and by the way, it expands it from 8 corridors, I think, that were in Thrive. Andrew and Natalie's bill listed 44 corridors in the county, a bit of an addition. And the corridor plans that are being launched now no longer affect just the houses facing the corridor. Now these plans go deeper into the neighborhoods, and there's a neighborhood across from Blair High School, which is being hit by one of these plans, where it's not just changing the corridor, it's changing the nature of the neighborhood internal to the corridor. All this being done with the same disregard that they showed in doing the just the simple corridor thing, what they call more housing now, which is also wishful thinking. They're using the same disregard for the community they used then. The planning department had virtually no meetings where they discussed this. Citizens had no input. The citizens weren't engaged in a committee. You have a couple of public meetings and then they're done with you. This is not the way we should be doing planning in the county. And this, frankly, is not the way we did planning when we earned our reputation for building the kind of neighborhoods that people wanted to live in. The letter I wrote that I read to you had 5 major points. One is protect tenants from displacement. No plan for that. Protect homeowners and property rights. Not so much. Require true affordability. Totally ignored in this bill. Ensure language access and oversight, and respect the master planning process. Utterly disregarded in this bill. I'll also remind people that when Thrive was passed, and when the council began not only pass Thrive, but now talk about what they were going to do next, it was almost parroting. Everybody would say, well, we're going to use the master plan process. Even Thrive says that this is visionary and that it's going to be implemented through the master plan process. The master plan process has been totally dismantled now, and they're not using the master plan process. The council didn't use the master plan process. The planning board didn't use the master plan process. Yet that's what they promised communities they would do when these new plans, which many communities were fearful that would be disruptive, as they started rolling them out, there is no master plan process. This CTA is a vote to continue the destruction of planning in Montgomery County. It cuts residents out of a meaningful role. Residents will tell you that the reduction of planning input to a couple of presentations by planning staff of what they want to do, and then the dutiful collection of Post-it notes where residents can make comments followed by a decision that has no reflection of what their comments were. And there used to be a real role for residents who worked with developers and had real conversations. Now the entire planning process turned over to individual planning staff members, encouraged by at least two planning board members who seem to hate suburban neighborhoods and believe that they should put density everywhere. Their words, not mine. The idea that you have people on the planning board who don't respect the neighborhoods and don't think that the planning board should listen to or consider the views of people who live here is kind of shocking. Why the council continues to let them sit on the planning board, I don't know. There was no substantive conversation at the committee level or at the council level about stormwater management and the lack of standards for impervious surface and tree coverage. I sent a 9-page memo to the council raising numerous issues. It was not discussed at the committee level or at the full council. Civic associations, including Montgomery Civic Federation, sent letters and requests for information. It was not discussed or addressed. It was said that these issues had been discussed for years, patently untrue, and certainly not discussed in a public process. And maybe they have, but not in any kind of deliberative way. There was one public hearing in February, and that public hearing was for 5 different proposals. There were 2 committee work sessions done at the council, and there was 1 council session with virtually no questions. Residents did not get their questions answered. When Silver Spring was undergoing a major master plan discussion, the planning board actually had a meeting at Blair High School. And that meeting filled the auditorium with hundreds of people. That's what used to happen when the planning board wanted to listen to what people had to say. This doesn't happen anymore. It is profoundly disrespectful of the residents of this county. There is no evidence the CTA will increase ownership options for our so-called missing middle, firefighters, teachers, and police officers. The new, more expensive units that may come out of this may very well be rental units. There's actually no requirement for any affordable units. And I want to explain why there's no requirement. If a person takes a lot and they decide that instead of leaving the single family home there, they want to build a duplex, there's no requirement for an affordable unit. None. Zero. Nada. If somebody decides they want to put 3 units there, they can put 3 units there. The units will be narrower and smaller, and 1 unit has to be affordable to what they called workforce housing that has a cap on it of incomes around $177,000. That number is not usually the number we associate with affordable housing, and that's the only unit. So in the best circumstance, 1 out of those 3 units would have to be affordable. There is not a requirement until you get into larger numbers of units for affordability. And that's a real problem because much of the replacement of the single family houses could be with duplexes where the developer doesn't have to worry about providing an affordable unit. They don't have to worry about building townhouses that are 16 feet wide instead of 20 or 24 feet wide. They can make as much or more by not building the 3rd unit. These changes will come because this CTA will not be evident all at once, and because it's also slowly chipping away at communities around the county. Because this relies on individual homeowners or property owners selling their properties, it's not like in a master plan where we took some very large properties and zoned developers for greater density and they would plan out everything they owned. This is where every individual has to make a decision that they want to tear down their house. So there's no likelihood of any architectural consistency when this is done on a block, as it's going to be done in one-off kind of way. And there's no way that you're going to be able to address any of the bigger issues. The planning board said that, for stormwater and things like that, they'll have to bring something to the planning board. But the truth is, for a very long time, just doing one house is not going to change. They will have to find that it has no impact. And that's unfortunate. It's not, no one house is going to trigger a need for some kind of collective action. It's only when you start thinking about what happens if this occurs at scale that you have to start worrying about what are the impacts going to be. So much for buying a home in a neighborhood because you like it. You no longer have any assurance that the neighborhood can be changed with no citizen involvement. Now, this is another concern because, people actually do a lot of research when they decide where they want to live. And a lot of people consult the master plan to see what the future plans for the neighborhood are. The council's now established the precedent that we don't need plans. We don't need to abide by the master plan. And we can change a neighborhood. If we decide that a neighborhood should have a higher percentage of businesses in it, whether we should insert commercial districts in the middle of neighborhoods, all these things the council's basically said it can do without having to go through a master plan process. It's kind of appalling, and it's no wonder that residents are worried. And what I think people need to think about is this going to make people say, do I want to live in Montgomery County where I don't have any certainty as to where I'm moving? Or should I go to counties where they're not doing stuff like this? Neighbors are going to have to be vigilant. If is there a proposed development nearby? How many trees are going to come down? Are there going to be more cars trying to park on an already overcrowded street? And will their will their window views now be of concrete? Residents who live here today have a right to have a real voice in the future of the county. They're not necessarily resistant to change, but they want to be heard and listened to. They're smart, and we would do well to work with them. We've done this in the past, and the abandonment of this process does not come out of any indication that we're not able to do development in the county. It's just an utter disdain for people and a belief that we're going to have to change, that we have the right to change things without engaging with them. And that, like I said, is a big departure. I think the ZTA is one more example of the need for reform at park and planning. I will not be county executive after next year, but I still believe that we need a planning board that is more accountable to the executive branch, where much of the work has to be done and implementation of land use happens. I'm not interested in changing the nature of the board. I do think that executive branch ought to be allowed to appoint one person to the board, which they used to be able to do. But to have this only approved by the council, and where the council has no oversight, and there's no way that a council that does not have daily meetings or engagement with the planning process can have any kind of meaningful oversight of the planning board, unlike executive departments where staff is tasked to actually work with the planning board and work with planning staff. There are a lot of reasons to look at what we can change. But right now, developers and planners are unaccountable to the residents, and the planners have unchecked control. The passage of this CTA, there's a greater urgency to have a planning process that's more inclusive of the people who live here now. And the idea that you're planning for the future without any regard for the people who live here is also a bit odd. This idea that you know best what people want who are going to come here 20 years from now, and that because you know that, you should be able to disregard what people think who live here today is a bit disrespectful. Maybe a bit is a little bit of a euphemism. It is as if the people here have no say in their future, and I don't think that's the message we want to send to our residents. And speaking about planning for the future, one of the worst aspects is this total disregard for existing master plans and the continued assertion that we had to do this to accommodate future growth. You hear this, I forget the right word for it, but you hear this phrase, you have to accommodate growth, we have to accommodate growth, as if the county hasn't done that. So just to set that nonsense aside, in our current master plans, we've set aside enough development to build another 85,000 units plus. On top of the 85 are 34,000 units that are unbuilt but approved today. These are units that could be built tomorrow if a developer pulled a building permit. I can tell you one of the problems is a large number of those units are high rises. High rises require very high incomes. The projected demographic that's moving to Montgomery County does not support the number of units that require high incomes. So the planning board would do well to revisit some of their planning, which they've actually been forced to do. And I was really happy to help a developer in White Flint too, where he told the planning board that he could not build the high rises that were in his plan because there's no market for it. Not me. The developer said that. And the developer said, I want to build townhouses and lower rise buildings that I can build that would match the incomes of the people who want to come here. Gosh, that sounds like what we're supposed to be doing. He had to fight with the planning staff to get their objections removed. And I had to talk to the planning director to ask them, what the hell are they thinking when a developer tells you that I don't have the market for high rises and they tell you they want to build something less dense, and the planning staff is telling them what they're not going to approve if they go forward with a less dense project. This is not the way this is supposed to work, but it's indicative of the problem. As long as the planning staff sticks with this idea that everything should be in high rises and all the density should be high rise, they're pretty much guaranteeing a slow building process. They're guaranteeing also that the people will have to have very high incomes to live there, which means many people in this county, and again, many Black and brown families in this county, are not going to be able to live there. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. The other thing the council ignores, and we sent them a copy of the letter, and it came from the Council of Governments, which originally announced the increased estimates of how many housing units the county needed. The letter said that the county already has enough planned capacity in its master plans to accommodate even more growth than what's projected to happen by 2050. So we've already been told that we've planned, unlike other jurisdictions. Most of our area follows these practices, but not everybody in the country does. Unlike many other places, this county was prepared to handle future growth, is prepared to handle future growth, and did not need any trespassing into existing neighborhoods in order to accomplish it. This is simply done to set the stage for a certain group of developers who want to think of your single family neighborhood as the next places to build townhouses. That's the one piece of land that outside of the planned developments is a little scarce in the county. Anyway, the council continues to resurrect this false notion that but for this craziness, we can't support future growth. And that's just patently false. It is untrue. And any reporter who wants a briefing on what's in our master plans and what's projected and the incomes of who's projected to come here, I'm more than happy to do that for you. On a happier note, yesterday we were at Twin Labs Complex in Rockville to welcome a new clean energy manufacturing jobs. I joined Governor Wes Moore in celebrating those jobs at this week's ribbon cutting. Liatris is expanding its current operations to establish a prototyping center for next generation insulation. At this center, they will refine their technology and begin pilot manufacturing to demonstrate how their insulation is of better quality, more affordable, and more environmentally friendly and fireproof as an alternative to the foams that are out there today. The company's technology outperforms the products dominating today's market, and they expect to be a leader in the growing advanced construction industry. And not to be too geeky at a personal level, but I can create an R30 wall, which is a highly insulated wall, higher than the current requirements, and 3.5 inches, which means you could put R30 in a 2x4 studded wall, whereas getting R30 into a wall normally would require a 5.5 inch cavity or a 2x6 studded wall. So the R30 wall is a higher level of insulation, makes buildings more efficient. If you can get that level of insulation and you don't have to build as thick a wall, it cuts construction costs. There are a lot of positives that come out of this. And I'm really excited about this company, and I think they've got a very interesting future. This project's on a fast track. Liatris has a pending application for the New Technology Innovation Fund grant money and has received both a Montgomery County MOVE grant and an award of the Maryland Department of Commerce's Build Our Future program. These county funds are a smart investment in our local economy, uniquely impactful where federal awards might not cover equipment purchases and where corporate partners prefer these tools to be locally owned and maintained. That's exciting because Leatris right now is expanding and hiring locally, co-locating with their research and development teams to maximize effectiveness and speed. They've already hired 15 people, and soon they're going to be scaling up their manufacturing operations, and they're interested in building the manufacturing here in the county as well. And a serious manufacturing facility is going to require an even larger facility than where they are today. Having that here is going to offer even more good paying jobs in the county. So the collaboration between Leatris, the county, and the state underscores our commitment to fostering innovation and supporting businesses to bring tangible benefits to our residents. We want to invest in people who constantly desire to push the envelope. Montgomery County is committed to reducing carbon emissions and to make our home a cleaner place to live. Supporting this company makes physical and environmental sense. It's an example of our commitment to building a more sustainable and affordable future right here in our community. So before we get to questions, I'm going to let you talk to my health team, and then I'll be back.
Oh, there you are.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. From Public Health this week, it's just a reminder that we continue with another week of very hot temperatures. Again, we caution folks with heat sensitivities, especially our residents who are 65 and older, to please be aware of those temperatures. Stay hydrated, stay cool. We want to see, we'd love to see zero heat-related illnesses, but we know every week we have dozens of people who end up at the emergency department or outpatient centers with heat-related illnesses. So again, we're just stressing that people be cautious of that. Also, I know it is still July, but we are already engaged in our back-to-school vaccinations. So just a reminder to parents out there that if you are visiting your pediatrician this summer with your child, please inquire about the vaccines that they should be getting during those visits. If you don't have a pediatrician or you'd like to come to one of our health clinics, we have a number of sites across the county where we're doing those school-required vaccinations. And I recommend that you go to the Montgomery County immunizations page for all of those listings and all those details. It's a lot of information depending on what age your child is, so we have it all outlined on the website. Happy to take any questions that our media partners may have.
Thank you, Mr. Dano. Okay, members of the media, I do not see Dr. Stoddard here. Members of the media, questions? I see Thalia Varelas from Univision DC has her hand up. Good afternoon, Thalia.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for taking my question. So for the county executive, you will not be supporting and signing ZTA 2502?
Sadly, I don't have to sign it. I don't have a veto. Trust me, if I had a veto, I'd veto it.
Thank you.
So I can't, I'm going to continue to work with the community. Obviously, we need a change in perspective. So I'll continue to try to help figure out how do we get a change in perspective.
Thank you, Thalia. Jeannie Bixby, Bethesda Today. Good afternoon, Jeannie. You might need to
I
mute.
was talking away and muted. Good afternoon, Lorna. Good afternoon, Mark.
Good afternoon.
Mark, I have two questions for you. One, I was wondering if you could share, you had read a letter from constituents who were concerned about the ZTA. Could you share, are you able to share who wrote that letter?
It has individual names on it, so I can't.
Okay. And then I guess my follow-up question was, you and I have talked a lot about your opposition to this. Obviously, you shared with us your opposition, but I also was curious if you had any concerns. Yesterday I was in council chambers and people understandably have a lot of strong feelings about this legislation on either side, but it was, in my view, sitting in there as someone who sits in the council meetings every week, it was the most tense I've ever seen among the people in the crowd. There were people that kind of called out individual council members. I thought that there was a possibility that people could be escorted out. Do you have concerns about how people are expressing their views, the ways in which they do that?
Look, if I had been ignored and if I was told that you were going to have a master plan process and then you don't do it, and you don't go out and do community meetings, particularly when they're meaningful. It's one thing to do. I think one of the council members had a community meeting like in the middle of the week last week when everything's already been made, all the decisions have been made, which is kind of meaningless. There's a whole process this council's walked away from. There are a lot of residents in this county who actually recognize that. And so they're not dumb. They know that the council's radically changing processes to cut them out of the way decisions are made in the county, particularly regarding land use and zoning. There are residents who've heard two of the planning board members basically say, you shouldn't listen to the residents. We're just going to build housing everywhere. So when you got a planning board that's got serious problems with some of its members, when you've got processes that utterly disrespected the community, I'm not sure what exactly you expect to see when those people come into meetings. To be greeted by, gee, thanks for working with us. We're really excited about this. Or we really feel disrespected and ignored. And I think what you saw is people who feel disrespected and ignored. I get it. And I got to say, I've had my share of meetings with people where I don't always say things that people want to hear, and I deal with angry people too. That's part of being a politician. If you think that you're going to go through politics and everything you say is going to be greeted with open arms and that you're not going to irritate people and then you get angry when people are irritated, you should find another job. This job means that sometimes people get upset with what you do and you got to deal with it. And I don't tell people that they should shut up. I used to be a community activist. I was in meetings, and when I felt disrespected, and I had an opportunity at public comments, I would say what I thought. And I expect people to be free to say what they think. And if people feel disrespected and ignored by council members, the council members need to hear that. I'm not sure what kind of kumbaya moment anybody was expecting there yesterday, but I certainly didn't think it was going to be a kumbaya moment. And I'm okay with it. Nobody's getting violent and nobody's threatening anybody. And, other than that, if all it's, words, it's what my father always said to me, sticks and stones will break your bones, words never hurt me. If somebody doesn't like what you did and you're confident in what you did, ignore it. If they make you uncomfortable because they're saying they feel like they got cheated, maybe you should think about what you did.
Well, just to follow up on what you said, I think that the concern that some council members were expressing was less about just the dissent in general, which is to be expected, but I think some council members did feel threatened by individual things that were said and some of the posters that had wrecking balls juxtaposed against the council members' faces. And I guess I'm asking, I think probably all of us on this briefing can agree that it's important that people are able to dissent, but do you think that that behavior is appropriate when it's becoming personal?
I guess, I don't know. You're a politician. It is personal. You have taken on, this role to make decisions that affect the community. You might want to check in and understand what people think, unless you actually believe that you don't care what they think, in which case there's no reason to know what they think. I mean, I guess because I've experienced this before and I know what it's like that just comes with the territory. Nobody there was going to hurt anybody. Nobody's physically threatening anybody. Nobody's going to disrupt people's lives. So I just think you just, grin and bear it. If you can't grin, then just bear it.
You've talked a lot about, I guess just one more follow-up. I hope somebody else is in the queue then. But you've talked a lot about feeling that there wasn't enough community input sessions. I mean, I covered several of these sessions, my colleagues did. What do you think would have been the appropriate
Jesus.
amount of input meetings?
So, first place, you shouldn't have had input meetings. I'll tell you what we used to do until Casey came along and started dismantling. I mean, the first thing that happened, this goes back even before Casey, to Rollins Stanley. They began shrinking the area that involved public input. So they would try to focus on only the downtown and ignore the fact that whatever happens in downtown affects the neighborhoods around it. When the master plans were done, the Bethesda plan, Silver Springs plan, were all done in the context of a slightly larger community than just the commercial buildings that were being rezoned. That's has changed over time. But what had been the essence of plans were you would get appointed to a committee. They created committees for every master plan, and the committee had residents on it. And the residents would meet with developers would be represented, business people would be represented, everybody would meet, and you go through months of meetings together, going block by block, listening to what, the developers thought that they wanted to do, listening to what residents' concerns were. And at the end of the day, you created plans in which residents were fully engaged and had the opportunity to shape the way their community was going to look. And I'll tell you, Fairfax County still does that. So it'll be another distinguishing mark where Montgomery County has lost space to Fairfax County. So you had meaningful input. The staff was there to support. The staff is no longer there to support. The way the community reacts to staff is staff's coming in and telling what they're going to do. And they could care less what you think. And from what I've seen in the plans and what I've heard from the residents, is that's a pretty accurate depiction of the staff. No meaningful changes have been made to this. No meaningful changes were made to Thrive. Thrive was done in the middle of COVID. They couldn't have waited a year or two until COVID was over so you could have proper community meetings and engage people. No, they flourished under COVID because it minimized the amount of public input. So if you were going back to a process, you'd appoint a citizen committee with not just citizens, but with the other players who are supposed to be in there. Planning staff would be support instead of planning staff coming in with a preconceived notion of how they're going to wreck your neighborhood or wreck whatever it is they apparently feel like wrecking. And then you'd come out with a plan that would be voted on, and then it would go to the board and go to the council. And the council and the board would both have some reasonable sense that the plan had support from a broad range of members in the community. And it also means you don't get to stack the plan. I was appointed to the major transportation panel that Duncan appointed. I was appointed to the Silver Spring Sector Plan Committee for that. I was appointed to another committee on the oversight of development in Silver Spring when they were trying to pick a developer. I know what these committees used to look like. I know the role that citizens used to play. So I know what's missing. And so do a lot of these other people. They lived in quiet neighborhoods for a long time where it was just assumed that your master plan was your master plan. And they understood where this process worked. And now they're discovering that not only isn't their master plan, but there's no process anymore. The process is, we're going to tell you what we're going to do to you. You can put your notes on a post-it board. You got 2 minutes to talk. That's really helpful. If you can articulate an argument in 2 minutes, God bless you. And they've basically cut people out of the process. So yeah, if I were a resident and I felt I was cut out of the process, I'd be irritated.
Thank you. Jeannie,
All right,
do you have
thank
any
you.
follow-up questions? Are you good?
Yep, thank you.
Excellent. Members of the media, any additional questions for the county executive and or Mr. O'Donnell this afternoon? Any more questions? No more questions? Well, thank you for joining us. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.